Thanks, Rick. That was really a great overview. So now that we've gotten some key advice for what young professionals should be thinking about when it comes to their retirement and financial planning, we're going to turn back to the policy, because planning for retirement in the United States as a whole remains incredibly difficult and complex, as Rick was illustrating, in terms of what's out there. Many Americans continue to fall short. So now we're going to look at the bigger picture and talk about some of the ways that policy could improve retirement security. Luckily, we have the perfect person to lead that discussion. Ida Rademacher is a vice president at the Aspen Institute and executive director of the Aspen Financial Security Program. Aspen's program has done so much terrific work under her leadership, looking holistically at retirement and financial security. Ida is an expert in economic inclusion research and policy, and she has a reputation, which I can verify, as a collaborative and creative thinker. We're so pleased to have her and her team as partners in this campaign, and I'm going to turn it over to Ida to lead the next session.
This on, because it's only the third time I've had to hear it. Can you guys hear me? Is that all right? All right, hi. I'm glad we're following Rick. I'm glad we're actually coming at the end of this for the retirement policy conversation. I want to invite my colleagues up here. And I want to start with just two thank yous. I want to thank the Bipartisan Policy Center for both the earlier commission work and the vision to create a Funding Our Future campaign, and to bringing in such a diverse set of organizations and individuals. I think that the way that somebody I heard recently described this issue as it's a chronic illness, you know? So it's like, it never feels like the right time to have to act. And collectively, we're grappling with that as a generation with climate change. We're grappling with it with retirement and longevity issues. They are things that are hard to wrap our head around. So it takes people like Rick making this personal. And it also takes us thinking hard about the experiences of not just our friends and families, but asking one step beyond, because I do feel like there is a way that the fact that half of the population in this country's experience of their financial life is quite different than the one for folks in our room. And I don't think we have to look too far, but we have to make that part of the work that we do, is to really try to connect this huge critical policy challenge to the personal at every given moment to try to prioritize it. So Funding Our Future campaign, as we'll hear, has an amazing set of different organizations with different ideas in some ways about what the solutions are, but we all agree on the urgency of solving a problem that is hard to feel urgent about sometimes until you look at those alarming graphs. So thank you for that. And with that, I just want to introduce the panel, and I'm thrilled everybody can be here today. So I think we'll just go along the way. Andrew, are you at the end? So Andy Schreiner is the Vice President of Public Policy at Fidelity Investments, and it's great to see you here. I'm going to do short bios just because we have a short amount of time and a lot of great folks and insights on the table. But Andy leads a lot of the work and the team at Fidelity that develops the firm's positions on key policy issues related to retirement and tax, financial services, a whole host of other issues, and also really is the face of the liaisons with groups like this, and we appreciate the input that Fidelity has and the voice that you have on these issues. And Jim, right here beside me here, is president of the American Benefits Council, and it's great to be having you on the panel, Jim. You've been in that role since 1992, leading what is a very growing and very powerful group of employer voices, and really helping to look at the policy positions and needs of those employers around a whole host of benefits that deliver health and financial well-being to the workforce. Another critical pieces we'll see as we try to unpack this retirement issue. Monique, good to see you. Monique Morrissey is an economist at the Economic Policy Institute, where I read everything you put out within the week, usually, or month, or whenever David writes me talking points. Where's David? He's in the room. But the Economic Policy Institute has had a lot of work with Monique leading much of it in terms of policy analysis on a whole range of the issues that we're talking about here, not just, again, as personal finance, but also as a policy issue. Social Security, pensions, employee benefits, household savings, tax expenditures, all the issues of financial markets and Federal Reserves. It's great to have you on the panel. Thanks, Monique. And Kathleen Romig is the Senior Policy Analyst at the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities, which I'm sure no matter what kind of support people in the room are doing for your congressman, CBPP is always part of who you consult to kind of get insight on those things. And oftentimes it's Kathleen who has been doing the analysis on Social Security, on supplemental security income, on a lot of other budget issues. And that's really what we hope to do today is kind of talk about this range of issues that connect to retirement security. We certainly have talked a little bit about the growing costs of some of those key pillars, Medicaid and Social Security, and we'll revisit those in this context, but also alongside of that other critical dimension, which is the 401k system, the employer-based savings system in this country. So we'll try to get a flavor of it, and I also want to leave 5 to 10 minutes for these questions. So let me just jump into it, and thanks for your patience getting through bios. Monique, let's start with you. I think that in some ways you've tried to paint the biggest picture in terms of your understanding of, from a household's perspective, what are the challenges they're facing when it comes to achieving a secure retirement. So would you want to kind of start by unpacking that a little bit for us?
Yeah, sure.
Great.
Sorry, make sure I'm, does this thing light up? Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, first of all, I thank you very much for having me here. I'm really pleased to be here. And I agree that we have a diversity of views. There is one thing we all seem to agree on, which is that there is a problem, that taken together, Social Security, private savings, and employer provided, we don't have enough. And believe it or not, as an economist, I can tell you that not even everyone agrees on that, but everyone here agrees on that. And there are some economists that think it's perfectly rational to not have very much when you retire because you might be dead, and so it's better to consume now. This is, believe it or not, a perfectly legitimate, strange and not perspective, but it does exist out there among economists, and I don't think any of us share that view, so we can rule that out. I think another thing we all probably agree on is that yes, the TSP is great, and you should all max that out. It's the lowest cost, and it's the gold standard for 401ks, and every private savings account plan that we talk about later should approach it in terms of keeping costs down and allowing diversification. So what is the biggest challenge that workers face? A lot of people would say, well, people aren't saving enough. It's a little bit subtle, but I would say something different, which is the biggest challenge we face is the loss of secure retirement income. And by that I mean that the average Gen Xer, which is me, and the average millennial, which is a lot of you guys, are going to see Social Security cuts that are down by about 22% compared to what you would have had before the 1983 cuts that were talked about earlier came into effect. So everybody is already getting a Social Security benefit that's about 22% lower on average than you would have gotten before. And then in addition to that, this happened at a time, and people wouldn't have predicted, that we also saw basically the slow disappearance, or actually quite rapid disappearance of secure pensions in the private sector. So unless you work for a government employer, which you do, but the private sector workers are really not, most of them have a 401k plan instead of a pension. So we were cutting Social Security at a time when it wasn't really anticipated that people were also going to lose their pensions. And 401ks sort of were an accident. This is also something that people are maybe not aware of, but they were originally designed as deferred compensation for bank employees. So they really aren't designed to be a very good vehicle for retirement, but that's what most people have at this point. The Center for Retirement Research at Boston College has estimated that the typical millennial or Gen Xer has saved about as much as previous generations have at the same stage in their career. So when I say that the problem isn't that people aren't saving enough, it's that people are saving what they used to. So people are no more slacker now than they used to be. They're saving about the same, but what they're trying to make up for is the loss of these Social Security benefits and these pensions. And to put this in perspective, pension income remains, 35 years after 401ks became the dominant plan in the private sector, traditional pension income is still the majority of non-Social Security retirement income that retirees are getting. Thanks. So 401ks really have not filled the gap. They essentially replaced them one for one in terms of coverage, but they haven't replaced them one for one in terms of the average person having enough to retire on. And so, so biggest
challenges, yeah.
Yeah, trying to speed this up. Anyhow, I will, I came a little bit late, but I left a few charts. One of the things that EPI does is every 3 years, we put out a retirement income chart book, and we show how most people don't have much saved in these accounts at all. So the typical millennial has about $1,000. If that's you, you're not alone. Typical Gen Xer, maybe $5,000, $6,000. And even the typical baby boomer approaching retirement, and we're just talking about $20,000, nothing much. So if that is you, you shouldn't worry about that. We can talk about solutions later, but I just wanted to emphasize that even though the problem is often laid at the feet of workers, it's really not that people today are saving less than they used to. It's that they're saving the same amount, but they need more savings than they did before, and we need to fix that.
Okay, thanks. So there is still a savings gap, for sure, and the consequences of that are even bigger. So those are two of the giant challenges of that, and I think from a household perspective, become realer and realer as people start to face those costs. Jim, you start this from the other side, at least in terms of the fact that the U.S. does have a workplace-based savings system for retirement. You see this from the point of view of the employer, and in the retirement system, don't be confused, employers are called plan sponsors. It took me a little while to figure that out when I sort of was like, what? Who's a plan sponsor? That's Walmart. No, I don't know. But from a plan sponsor's perspective, from the employer's perspective, where do you see their challenges in this system kind of presenting themselves? What do you think the biggest hurdles are there?
So is this on? Nope. Help me out here. Yeah.
Okay, good.
All right, so I'm determined to be the good news messenger here. And not because the challenges are not great, but because I actually think the answers to some of those challenges are more within our grasp than might otherwise appear. And let me start first, actually, if I may, just on a really, really personal level, and then kind of get into the policy things too. You've heard many people already say this morning how important it is, please start as early as you can. An illustrative example of that, take two people, Jessica and Josh. Jessica starts putting away $5,000 at age 25 for 10 years. She stops at age 35 and contributes nothing more after age 35. Not recommending that, just using it as the illustration. So she's put away $50,000. Josh starts at age 35 and puts away $5,000 for 30 years until age 65. He has put aside 3 times as much as Jessica, $150,000. At age 65, given a 7% annual growth, Jessica will have $602,000. Josh will only have $541,000. So thanks to the magic of compound interest and this value of starting young, it makes a huge amount of difference. Now, on the policy front, macro, micro. The macro challenge or solution, I think, is that we really don't have a national retirement income policy in this country. And so consequently, and you all see it, dealing with, congressional legislation that's put in and hearings and whatever, policymakers rightly decry the decline of the traditional defined benefit pension plan, but then sometimes embark upon policies, which I'd be happy to talk about, that actually sort of hinder the ability for an employer to sponsor those defined benefit plans. Likewise, we decry the lack of adequate savings, but there have been proposals to limit how much you can put in on a tax-preferred basis. We saw some of that in the very sort of pre-stages of the tax reform discussion last year, when there was this concept of Rothification that would limit how much money people could be putting into their defined contribution 401k plans and such on a pre-tax basis. So where we need to really start, I think, is, and this is a part that you all can play a big role in, is encouraging our elected officials to come up with a national retirement income policy. Many of you had already arrived when I arrived, so I put some stuff out there on the table, but I'll just sort of ask you to maybe pick one up on the way out. We put together sort of a list of some guiding principles, which I'm not going to go through, and other groups will have other guiding principles, but the point is, these are the kinds of building blocks that could be of a national retirement income policy that could address it. Now you'll say, well, things are so partisan here, how is it possible? to embark upon this. And that's sort of where I'll get into the micro piece. The other piece that I left out on the table is a 3-page chart that lists a whole series of different bipartisan bills introduced having to do with improving the employer-sponsored retirement system. As partisan as things may be in other policy arenas in which you all are operating, and happy to report in the retirement area, there's a huge amount of bipartisan support. This whole Funding Our Future campaign is coordinated by the Bipartisan Policy Center. It is within reach. Some specific things that you can keep your eyes on to, there's something called the Retirement Enhancement Savings Act, which actually there's a potential for it to still be considered yet this year. There is also, and these are some component parts of it, things called multiple employer plans, MEPs, that would allow disparate small businesses to sort of band together and form plans and achieve some of the economies of scale. And maybe one last one that I think we can all appreciate, and that also has some bipartisan support, and that is support for electronic disclosure. Some of the rules that govern plans are still very, very antiquated in the sense that they require individual plan sponsors to give you and give the plan participants information on paper, even though we all have grown accustomed to getting information electronically. A huge amount of money and time and effort could be saved. A lot of trees could be saved, and still it would enable those people who don't have access to some sort of a device or computer to request their plan information on paper. These are just practical things. They're maybe not all earth-shattering things, but they would all be building blocks in improving the system.
Thanks, and we'll certainly come back around to this, but I actually want to stay with the employer-based retirement savings plan for a minute. So Kathleen, I'm going to skip you for a minute and go to Andy because I feel like it hangs together. It should hang together a little bit more in our minds. Jim, thank you for unpacking some of the broader, both possibilities, but also, some of the issues that employers are facing when it comes to providing retirement savings through the workplace. Andy, I want to actually ask you to come in, broadly with anything you want to add about the challenges that you're seeing, but specifically, when you do look outside of government, when you look at the private sector, about half of employers offer a retirement savings plan, and about half don't. We heard about that earlier today. So it's a lot harder, I think, for folks to kind of think about this savings as an opportunity when it's not something that's provided at the workplace. I wonder if you might talk a little bit about, and the MEPS is part of what would describe that with a policy thing, but for the smaller businesses, I think please feel free to speak broadly to the employer-based savings plan and where you think the challenges are, but specifically there, where do you think there's both challenges and opportunities?
Yep. Is this on?
Yep.
Thank you. And first, I just want to thank Shai and BPC. I do think that they have been doing a lot of great work, and we've been participating with them over a number of years. And so thank you guys for the opportunity here. Jim, a lot of the comments that you just made on e-delivery, first of all, I'll note I did not leave any materials out there because we do like to e-deliver. So if folks have questions, I'm happy to email them over to you afterwards. We do have some on fidelity.com as well. This idea that has been raised today about the importance of the thrift savings plan, right? So you all are very lucky in that you have a retirement savings plan available to you at work. For those of us who are in the corporate sector as well at big companies like Fidelity, we have great benefit plans available to us. But as you're pointing out, for most small businesses, they don't have the ability to offer those types of plans, right? So 50% of workers don't have a retirement plan available to them. And if I take a step kind of backwards down the number line here, I've been at Fidelity for 12 years. One of the first projects I worked on was a glossy brochure, again, we don't make those anymore, which was touting the benefits of the Pension Protection Act. And that had a lot to do with auto features and auto-enrolling people. Since that time, there's been a lot of effort by policymakers to try to solve this so-called coverage gap. And that's taken a lot of different forms over the years. We've had auto IRAs, which are still out there in many ways, but haven't been advanced because of employer mandate fatigue after the Affordable Care Act passed in 2010. We have the now defunct MyRA, so many of you in the room might not be aware of it, although all of us were very much involved in its development over the years. And then we've seen states, and I know we're going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. States now are trying to step into the void and create state-run plans. I think one of the challenges that policymakers face is that sometimes we have this idea that, say, policymakers, thus us in the retirement policy, we need to build a better mousetrap. That's not always the case. So in the case of open MEPs, which is something that we see as a really good opportunity for small businesses, it's taking an existing vehicle, looking at its flaws, and then thinking, how can we change it to make it a truly viable solution for small businesses? So I'll touch very briefly on that. So these idea of open multiple employer plans, right? So, you know, economies of scale they can't reach if you only have 5 to 10 employees. It allows employers to pool together. The problem is that the existing structure today has some restrictions around needing to be in the same industry. There's liability concerns, et cetera. You know, as Jim pointed out, there is a lot of bipartisan support for changes here. So I'm also very optimistic that in this type of environment where a lot can't get done, clearly the retirement savings issues are bipartisan. They should be bipartisan. And I think there's an opportunity this fall or, you know, in the next Congress to move on some of this. Finally, I'll just note, you know, we at Fidelity are thinking about the future of the workforce. So some talk about gig workers and contingent workforce. An open MEP could serve as a platform for workers in the future and really try to provide a consistent platform of benefits to folks as they're jumping from job to job, gig to gig. And that's something that we're starting to look more and more into.
And I know that's, to put a plug in, I know we're doing some research. We hope to release something later this year looking at what are the tech platforms and other ways to help kind of, you know, just what are the other options that are out there in terms of the access issues for retirement savings. If we don't get it all the way there for employees as the changing nature of work continues to happen. So we may get back into the gig pieces of this. So let's just review for a second, and then we'll go into a next round of questions. When you think about the 3 pillars in the Funding Our Future campaign, you know, the big one around, the first one is coverage access. You know, we want to make sure that everybody in the U.S. has access to a facilitated savings plan, ideally through the workplace, but through mediating platforms that can serve that function, if not. Because people maybe don't have enough, and the best part of getting accumulated consistent savings is by having some kind of a facilitated savings plan there. So there are coverage issues that can be, there's a set of policy issues around open MEPs and what can the private sector be incented to do in terms of expanding the access that employers have and workers have, but also reducing the risk for both employers and workers to do that savings system. That's probably a bad summary, but that's the first piece is a really critical one and one that Congress has absolute ability to help us solve as a society. This is the place where it would need to happen. It is starting to happen at the state level because the issue is becoming so critical there that some states are taking it you know, to their own advantage. And you know, Monique, I don't know if you want to say something quickly there before we move into kind of adequacy and longevity issues. If anybody has anything else to say about the state plans, but just so you know that the federal automatic enrollment and auto IRA ideas that haven't really gained purchase as a federal law have been taken up by a growing number of states to solve this access option. And so that is an additional innovation. I think that there's both policy innovation and market innovation happening, not necessarily here in DC, but certainly in the private sector and certainly in some of the states.
Yeah, no, that's true. Right now with gridlock and polarization at the federal level, the states and even some cities are getting into the game. And it's hard to generalize about these plans. There are different kinds, but probably the best known are the secure choice plans, which are auto IRAs. So technically they're not really employer plans, they're IRAs, but the employer has a role in facilitating access. And all of these plans, I should step back and say, are designed to improve access, especially for private sector workers who work for small businesses and for lower income workers, because these are the people that typically don't have an employer-sponsored plan, don't have access to an employer-sponsored plan. So the primary function of these plans is facilitating access and also sort of dealing with behavioral issues that Rick Edelman raised earlier, you know, in terms of making it easier and like you opt out instead of opting in, so you're more likely to actually participate. You might escalate the contribution rate, things like that. But there are limitations to these plans also. They're state plans, so they can't address issues around tax, like, for example, tax incentives. They are also, a lot of them are not ERISA plans by design, because that's to enable, you can't have a requirement that employers participate and make it an ERISA plan, but that means employers can't contribute to these plans either. And then a lot of the plans are also sort of the devil's in the details about whether or not they keep costs down, or they have appropriate diversified investments, and they limit risk and things like that. So especially for low-income workers who might need access to these
And what I'd
plans.
say to this is, I think in terms of the mainline message here, the recognition that this problem needs to be solved means that new kinds of people are stepping up to say, what are ideas here, and what is a floor that's better than no floor?
Yeah.
And so there's some additional piece of the mix. So it's something to keep in mind of. But ideally, it kick back to the federal policy level at some point. I can't imagine. It's kind of like having gas standards in all 50 states, right?
Yeah, and I'll keep it short, but I do want to piggyback off of that, because Kathleen's in the room. Kathleen Kennedy Townsend is now at EPI, and she's done a lot of work over the years. She is on the Maryland, she's on the board of the Maryland task force that's creating the plan in Maryland, but she's going to be working to take some of the lessons that we learned from these experiments at the state level, and maybe a few years down the road, take it at the federal level. So anyhow, so definitely it's sort of an incubator for, watch the states.
And just, sorry?
You want us to weigh in? You said.
I want to weigh in, but I also want to put the other table, so you can, it's kind of like carte blanche across the table here, because the other thing, I'm just mindful of our time, is that the other two pillars really in the Funding Our Future part are, if we're going to solve this challenge, if there's going to be retirement policy in a comprehensive way, we're looking at coverage, but we're also looking at a lot of the issues that were brought up earlier around expenses are spiking for people as they age. People are living longer. Social Security and Medicaid is potentially less, not potentially, almost guaranteed to be less of what they have as a nest egg to support itself. So this whole idea of lifetime income and how does the solving of longevity happen with lifetime income as well. Social Security has been always that annuity in some ways for people, that is the kind of pillar one of a retirement system. But I think that within plans, that's another area as well. So I'd really want Kathleen to speak, and then Jim. And feel free to bring in the kind of what you see about other actors coming into this space as well. I think it's great. But Kathleen, would you start? And thanks for being patient.
Sure, of course. Is this on? Yeah, okay, thank you. This is the point of the afternoon where I normally have everyone do a show of hands about, is Social Security going to be here for you? But you have been very lucky to have people across sectors, across parties, all telling you that Social Security, while it must look different for you, by the time that you retire, will be here for you. So are we all clear on this? Yes? Truth is truth, facts are facts? Okay, cool. But one thing that we all agreed on as part of the Funding Our Future effort is that Social Security should be strengthened, that this is an urgent priority for our country. And while we might disagree on how we think it should be strengthened or why we think it should be strengthened, this is something that unites all of us. And so I'm on Team Rick here. I think that the most urgent reason that Social Security must be strengthened is that we simply cannot ask working families to take a hit of 25% when they retire. And those working families will be your families, because that's when these trust fund reserves will become depleted. That would be a disaster. Average benefits are $17,000 a year. Think about that, 25% less than that. That's just not acceptable, and it would mean, as Rick pointed out, people not being able to afford medical bills, people not being able to keep their homes, and things like that. So it's urgent that we fix this problem. But I'm going to depart a bit from what Chuck was telling you, because I think that while the shortfall is real, it's manageable. For many, many years, Social Security has cost about 5% of GDP. As the baby boom retires, and as the lower birth rates that we've experienced for several decades have kind of play out in Social Security's finances, the Social Security program is expected to cost 6% of GDP for many, many, many years. Stable, this is not exponential growth, this is a stable level of GDP. So from 5 to 6%. So we have a problem that amounts to 1% of GDP. This is a manageable problem. We can fix it. I personally do not think we should fix it on the back of working American families who are going to need those benefits now and in the future. I think that we should fix it by kicking in a little bit more. That's
great.
Yeah.
And I think, when you think about what are the income streams that you have in retirement, this is another big area where you've been doing a lot of work, and I think we probably should bring in the issue about what are the private savings opportunities? What does the retirement system need to have in it for that lifetime income idea, so people have a certain sense of not just how do we accumulate money in a retirement system, but how do we get smart about people's choices in that decumulation phase? Do you want to say something
Sure,
about
be happy to.
that piece?
Yeah, so actually, and some of this is the topic of some pretty active conversations going on right now in Congress relative to something that you might hear the term LIDA, or Lifetime Income Disclosure Act. The idea that there should be more information given to individuals in terms of, what does their current savings, let's say in their 401k, translate into in the form of a stream of income later on, hopefully with the thought in mind that it'll then encourage people to see, well, my needs are actually greater than, than it appears today. Because we don't have time, the legislation itself needs some other changes in terms of giving greater flexibility to a variety of employers in terms of how they would go about doing it. But the concept is one of sort of more information to help people along. Another idea that's been tossed out in the past has been the idea of importing sort of features of traditional what are called defined benefit pension plans into, the defined contribution 401k type plans by, for example, maybe providing some better tax treatment for investments in a 401k, which pays out a guaranteed level of income as a traditional pension does, either in the form of, let's say, an annuity that a life insurance company would sell, or some comparable type of financial instrument that an investment company might sell. So there are things like that we don't. It doesn't always have to be sort of an either or, traditional pension or 401k. There could be perhaps a blend of it. Just real quickly, because I want to give my other panelists an opportunity to chime in. You asked if I wanted to sort of say anything about some of these other actors. The activity with the states is an example, I think, of a really well-intentioned approach to address people that you mentioned correctly, like really aimed especially at those who are employed by smaller employers with their own sponsor plan, that nonetheless has real-world implications, particularly for companies like my members that operate, in all 50 states. And you can imagine sort of the challenge of trying to comply, to say nothing of the individual municipalities like New York City. So the idea here is making sure that for those employers that already sponsor a plan, that they don't have to sort of jump through all sorts of hoops in terms of getting at sort of the intended audience, if you will, of people who are not fortunate enough to have an employer-sponsored plan.
Thank you. And I also, Andy, I want to invite you to kind of weigh in on, just the kind of innovations you're seeing, the kind that you're thinking about as a company, and that your peers are thinking about as well, in terms of any of the either accumulation phase opportunities here, any of the lifetime income issues.
Yep, and
For
so
this particular audiences, yeah.
yeah, and this is a good way to end on a high note. I mean, I do think that there is a lot of opportunity for policymakers. We in the financial services industry are obviously constantly looking at our own customers and savers and trying to better understand what those needs are. We've done some extensive research over the past couple of years about the contingent workforce, and I think a lot of people think of them as Uber drivers or Airbnb. It's not. Most of them are professionals, doctors, lawyers, others, big employers as well, as Jim knows, are moving more and more towards wanting to have a more contingent workforce, because there are benefits of having employees work in the private sector, move to the public sector. I used to work in the public sector for years, and I think there's benefits of having employees have kind of both different experiences. The challenges they face there, though, and a lot of reasons why contingent workers won't jump from job to job, income volatility is number one, and we're working on a pilot now to help people think about tax withholding and try to provide a product in that respect. The second is benefits, and so again, actually with Aspen working with you guys and trying to think about the future of work and what policies might be possible to help people have more portable benefits, whether it's healthcare or retirement or student loans or what have you. And then the third is really, empathetic, which is a sense of community. They lose a sense of community when you go and you're working on your own. And so how might we collectively help provide some of that to the workers and the needs that they face? And it's important work because it's moving fast in that direction.
I feel like it's, and I want to, if there's any one or two questions, please raise your hands, and we'd be happy to close this out with a question or two. Anybody have and let's just go ahead and take both in the middle, and we'll hear them, and we'll see what we can do with them as we close this out. Thank you.
Yes, thanks. Rob Colorina, AIC Investment. Maybe a question for Jim and whoever else wants to chime in a little bit on technology. Have you studied, to what extent, if you are going more online, and I understand the argument for green and saving environment, what have you, but the potential risk for cyber and other type of issues that come up there in terms of false applications and theft of funds, that type of thing. I'd be curious to that.
Theft and fraud and technology in the savings realm. And you, sir?
Is there an economic rationale for subsidizing private saving instead of using that money to shore up Social Security?
Just small questions at the end of the day that we'll go to. Go ahead. But we'll have to keep them short and provocative in terms of answers, just like your questions, just to keep on time.
Well, for every dollar of tax expenditure for employer-sponsored plans, $7.15 of benefits are actually paid from employer-sponsored plans. So that's a hugely valuable investment, and to the extent that we don't have a robust employer-sponsored system, the pressure on Social Security and other public programs will be even that much greater. On the technology question, I would just say that that is a real concern, as it is in every element of our life and our society these days. A lot of the effort, however, on electronic disclosure is really about meeting and employers and service providers legal obligations to provide information that isn't, in that respect, containing confidential information. It might be more generic information about plans. I mean, there is sometimes that there's something that's obviously very specific to that individual, but most of it really is just required annual notices and things of that nature, which wouldn't pose a risk.
I would also just add very quickly, I mean, ID theft is much more likely to happen through paper than it would be through electronic forms. Companies like Fidelity and others in the industry are partnering very closely with governments. There's a huge new sweeping data privacy law that just happened post some of the Facebook Equifax issues. I know I'm getting into a very different policy area that I cover, so I'm happy to follow up on that. But I would say that, I echo Jim's comments. A move to e-delivery should not have concerns from a data privacy perspective.
And I want to thank the panel. Do you want to say something?
Would you mind?
Just super quick, because we are so late. And
Okay. Oh, sorry. Yes, just on the final question, you've gotten some great advice today for how you can prepare yourselves individually for retirement, and that's wonderful. But you've also heard about some major gaps. 50% of people not having a savings plan at work. People trying to live on $40,000 in Washington, D.C. and also save for their retirements. People haven't even mentioned all of the things that are going to befall you in your lives, like illnesses, job losses, death of a spouse, all of these other things. So, doing this on your own, and also just all of the complications, all of the ignorance, frankly, that many of you came in with. This is really complicated to do on your own, and it's not going to work out all the time. But you know what does work for the vast majority of retirees in this country? Social Security. And so what we need to do is keep our promises for the system that is working for retirees now, and make sure that we spend any additional dollar on retirement savings, on shoring up that program before we start to invest in other things.
And as I said before, I think there's, again, the wonder of the coalition, Shai, and let me invite you up to close this out, is that there's a lot of robust debate around all these issues that has to happen. There has to be trust and relationships to make that happen. It has to be a priority that doesn't slip off of the top 1, 2, or 3 that you all can help convince your legislators to work on. So thank you for that, and thank you very much to the panel.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ida, and the whole panel. And if we could give all the participants from today just a big round of applause. I think these sessions were terrific. And I know they each put a lot of preparation into making today's event a success. Most of all, thanks to each of you for taking some time out of your day to join us. We hope you found the sessions interesting and informative, and have a great rest of the afternoon. Thank you.